Amir, hello everybody. Big welcome and thank you everybody for coming, and a big thank you to Petra, Mona, Grace, and Veronica for joining us today. My name is Miles. I'm a part of Books Against Borders. We are a political education collective that engage with anti-capitalist, abolitionist, and anti-colonial texts. And today we're going to be here talking about a new book, The Wolves Have Eyes: Surviving Migration in the Age of Artificial Intelligence by Petra Molnar, who is joining us today, along with fellows from the Migration and Tech Monitor. So thank you all. Just before we begin, I'm going to go a bit over structure and some safe spaces stuff, and just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll hear from our speakers. Just to remind everybody once again, this meeting is being recorded, and we will be uploading the recording onto our YouTube. We may edit bits if we feel necessary. There will be a Q&A section at the end of this meeting. So also, if you do want to ask a question but you don't want that to be in the recording, do just also let us know and we can edit bits out. This is also a space where we're going to be talking about quite serious topics, issues of border violence, state violence, international conflict, and both policing, militarization, serious things. So it's there is no need for you to engage in this any more than you want to. Do feel free to take a step back, leave. Obviously, there's no pressure to have your camera on. Likewise, for our speakers, if at any moment you feel they need to take a break, do please feel free to do that. That also means that we are going to be engaging this conversation from a matter of respect, acknowledging that different people in this conversation have different experiences, different points of power and privilege. We just want to be making sure that this is a space where everybody feels that they're able to listen and speak about these issues and these topics in a safe way. So The Wolves Have Eyes is a really fantastic new book that really brings together dramatic and seemingly dystopian, but as is made clear throughout the book, very real accounts of border technologies and violence used across, both across states, across borders, and against populations all over the world. We have instances in everywhere from Palestine to the Poland-Belarus border, to Mexico and more, and we'll be hearing about some of those different places today. And not only is this an account of the different technologies, the drones, the cameras, the walls that structure what we might know as border imperialism, but also, more importantly, the accounts and very real lived experiences and stories of the many people who live under those oppressive regimes across the world. So I am going to open it up now to just hear a little bit about our different speakers. And so we'll hear briefly from Petra, Mona, Grace, and Veronica about them and the different work that they do, and then we'll move on to some questions to hear a bit more about the book. So I will pass to you, Petra, if that's okay. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Miles, and thanks to the whole Books Against Borders team for inviting me to share a bit about the book, and also opening up the space to bring some colleagues and friends along, because I think that will really enrich the discussion. So I'm Petra. I'm a lawyer and an anthropologist by training, and indeed, after 6 years, my book is finally out just a few months ago, and I guess in Europe it came out on the 4th of July, so it's very hot off the press. So what I thought I would do is just situate the conversation a little bit, but then really give as much space as possible to Mona, Grace, and Veronica to talk about their work as well, because that is, I think, where a lot of the hopeful conversations and resistance and next step kind of forward-looking stuff sits. My work has mostly been looking at some of the sharpest edges of technology and how people on the move have been essentially technological experiments at the world's borders when it comes to the use and testing of new technologies. I like to show some photos also as I go along, just to illuminate some of the spaces that I've really been privileged to work in. Those do include occupied Palestinian territories, the US-Mexico border, different fringes and borders around Europe, East Africa, and a few others. Because I've always tried to understand these things from a comparative perspective, to try and stitch together this global story of power and violence, but also innovation and contestation when it comes to the use of new technologies and their real-life impacts. And as Miles so nicely put at the beginning, the book really tries to not be overly academic. I mean, it is undergirded by years of research and also legal analysis and perhaps some anthropological theory here and there too, but it is written in a more narrative way, foregrounding stories of people on the move who have been generous over the years to share their stories with me. Because ultimately, that's the crux of the book. Border violence is nothing new, unfortunately, and borders have been historically violent, but they are sharpened through the use of new technologies, whether that is AI, drones, different cameras, automated decision-making that is highly discriminatory, and much of it kind of happening behind closed doors. Some of this technology is easy to see, such as this AI fixed tower, which is actually from an Israeli surveillance company that has been sold to the US-Mexico frontier and is now used to expand the surveillance dragnet to capture people on the move. But there are also very draconian future-ish projects, such as the robo-dog that was announced in 2022 by Department of Homeland Security, once again at the US-Mexico border. But there are real people who are being already harmed by this. People like Mr. Elias Alvarado, who was a young husband and father who unfortunately passed away in the Sonora, just mere kilometers away from a major highway. And I visited the memorial site where a search and rescue group, the Battalion Search and Rescue, erected a beautiful orange cross in his memory. It was very stark, the kind of inhospitability of the region with these incursions of technologies that are again creating this dragnet where people like Mr. Elias Alvarado are being caught in. And it's not hard to imagine perhaps that in the not so distant future, people on the move will be pursued by robo-dogs, military grade quadruped machinery designed for specific purposes. I always also like to throw this picture up there. This is, of course, the infamous Trump wall. It also just reminds me of the arbitrariness and kind of social creation of borders, because, of course, it's a hulking behemoth of a wall. It's there like a wound across the landscape, but it also ends. And you can climb that hill there and pop your head over to the other side. If that doesn't remind us of the arbitrariness of borders, I don't know what will. Some other stories in the book are difficult, and the next photo, I think, shows that quite starkly. This is from a cemetery in the Evros region between Greece and Turkey, a land border and a border crossing for people on the move for many years, and also a site of border violence. And along this little village is the cemetery of largely unmarked graves. And I had a chance to visit a few times when I've gone to the region. And I was paying my respects to a relatively fresh grave of a young woman from Syria who passed away just 8 months before my arrival there. But as I was kneeling down, something caught my eye, something green and putrid in the earth. These 3 holes chewed out, 3 graves waiting. I know this image is not easy to look at, but it's important to bring it literally to the ground because, again, this is where experimental new technologies are being played around with. That is sound cannons, drones, different types of carceral technologies also, such as you'll see here. This is a refugee camp. This is on the island of Kos, one of the Greek hotspots that has housed thousands of people over the years, and now includes all sorts of biometric technology. Even virtual reality glasses were proposed once for the border guards. But a similar camp on the island of Samos, even though it had all this technology, didn't have running water 2 weeks before opening. There's a clear set of priorities at play, which I'm sure is something we will discuss all together. The fact that the private sector determines what we innovate on and why we have so much techno-solutionism driving the conversation, and why so much money is also being invested in a multi-billion-dollar border industrial complex that, once again, reifies or exacerbates the vast power differentials between those who get to innovate and communities that are the testing grounds for this technology. And I remember spending some time with a young mom, Asma, who was essentially facing a forcible transfer into one of these camps. And this is what she said: if we go there, we will go crazy. It's not hard to imagine why she would say that if this is what the camps look like. And, you know, I, as someone who's a refugee lawyer by training and an anthropologist who's been studying and learning about migration for years, I have my own migration story too that also informs the way I look at the world. I think it's important to keep the conversation around the contextual specificity of the border, of the refugee camp, but it doesn't just stop there. So those robo-dogs that I mentioned, a year after, the New York City Police Department proudly announced that they want to roll out robo-dogs on the streets of New York City to keep New York safe. One was even painted white with black spots on it, like a Dalmatian. So I think it's really important that we have conversations that foreground the agency of people on the move, while also recognizing that technologies don't just stop at the border, but rather bleed over into other facets of public life as well. So for those of you who are interested, this is the book. I would love to hear from you about it if you had a chance to read it, or if you're interested in discussing it further. But what I'm actually most excited about for today's conversation is the fact that I'm joined here by 3 colleagues and friends who are with us at the Migration and Technology Monitor Project, which is something that we started in 2020. First, it was going to be an observatory and a platform to house some of this work, but it quickly grew into a community. And last year, we launched a fellowship program for people on the move to tell their own stories on the impacts of technology at the border, both negative and positive. And with me today are 3 wonderful people who are really the experts when it comes to this stuff. We have Verónica Martinez, who was a fellow last year with us, and we're hoping that she'll continue working with us for many years to come. And we also have Mona Shtaya and Grace Gichanga, who are fellows with our new cohort this year. So I'm going to turn it over to them, who will tell you more about the work that they're doing. And we really look forward to having a conversation with all of you in the room. Maybe Veronica, you could go first.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Verónica Martinez, and I am a multimedia journalist. I cover immigration and border issues located in Ciudad Juárez and El Paso. I was born and raised in Juárez and El Paso, so having kind of like this dynamic of being on both sides of the border, having family on both sides, but also kind of like being divided by it has been kind of like part of my identity and my everyday life. But since like the 6 to 7 years that I have been working as a journalist covering the Las Cruces area, that's New Mexico, El Paso in Texas, and Ciudad Juárez in Mexico, I kind of like understood how border dynamics work in a very different level, kind of like going from the personal to kind of like understanding it more truthfully. But I loved some of the images. Well, not loved, but I was very interested by some of the images that Petra was showing to us. I think it shows that different levels of how borders exist. So for example, like we had this physical borders, like the border wall, right? Like that's something physical that you can touch, and it can even like impact our human activities, but also the natural and like fauna activities of the region. Then we have like natural borders, like a desert, like a mountain or a river. And then we have kind of like these more abstract kind of like borders. And it has been really fascinating to see how they impact our everyday life for communities in the border. So for example, immigration policy, seeing how the Migrant Protection Protocol, Title 42, all of these different policies that were implemented by Trump and Biden have impacted immigration influx. It shows the impact how these abstract ideas can have in our lives, right? Then we also, what I was talking to with Petra during like my time in the fellowship was like this idea of digital borders and how, for example, CBP1, this application that the Department of Homeland Security is using to make people make their appointments to present themselves at the border and then seek asylum, how that is creating kind of like this digital barrier, because it comes with different challenges. People trying to have access to internet sources, also power sources, and how at the end it's kind of like acting as this filter, right? And yeah, in general, my work is focused in looking at how these different levels of borders exist.
Great, thanks, Veronica. And I shared some stories that you've written in the chat. They're really excellent. Mona, do you want to go next, perhaps?
I would be more than happy to do that. Thank you so much for having us here and for the organizing, and for everyone who's joining here to hear from us today. So I am Mona Shtaya. I'm a Palestinian based in Palestine, and I usually work on surveillance technologies and censorship. I try through my work to do more intersectional approach whenever we're speaking about surveillance technologies, because as someone who's living in Palestine and or under the state of surveillance, I know that how you feel when you are living under a constant surveillance 24/7 along like all your life. So my project with the MTM, or Migration and Tech Monitor, is kind of focusing on breaking the silos so people won't feel isolated, won't feel that they are struggling with the surveillance technologies alone. And I'm trying to center the human experience for people in different countries, in different regions, in the center, and make this connection with the experience of Palestinians, as like our occupying power as one of the pioneering manufacturer for the surveillance industry, as they are developing that, designing that, and testing that on Palestinian before start selling that worldwide to profit from the ongoing apartheid and now from the ongoing genocide in Gaza Strip. And I think many of us know since the beginning of the genocide, like just 2 weeks after the genocide started, the Israeli authorities and companies started developing new technologies to utilize AI, to utilize different surveillance technologies to target people, displaced people in Gaza Strip, and to target them as they are indiscriminately and massively killing civilians in Gaza Strip. That being there, facing that, having a firsthand experience is kind of for me motivating me, encouraging me all the time to explore how those technologies are also used in other parts of the world, especially when the different investigative reports have been speaking about those different recent technologies. The Israelis were basically saying that we are planning to start selling that and profiting from that. So it's bragging about profiting from an ongoing genocide or genocide in the making. And with all of that in mind, to me, it's more of breaking those silos, speaking as a collective against the tech platforms. And also, as people who are living in global majority countries, we need to know more about each other, because our oppressors are using same tools, same tactics. They are sharing experiences about how they are oppressing us more, how they are silencing us. Like whenever I'm speaking with different friends and colleagues, and some of them are here in the room, I can see them. We usually speak about exactly the same tactics, sometimes the same technologies from Israeli companies or manufacturers that are used in Chile or in Myanmar or in India or in different other places. So in a nutshell, the main goal behind that is to inform people, to educate ourselves, and to make also people not feel the fear, not feel that if you are watched, then you can't mobilize, you can't organize, because we do have this chilling effect, and as like the panopticon effect on people, when people are feeling that they are watched all the time, they would be demotivated, they will be less likely to organize or mobilize, especially coming from Palestinian community, where also we are facing fragmentation because of the decades of occupation. People are also less likely, whenever they are feeling the surveillance, they would be less likely interested in having the Palestinian conversation, which aims at the end of the day to have more coordination about our narrative, about our struggle, and about how we can challenge all the oppression tactics that we are facing, whether it be in Palestine or in many other countries around the world that are now also oppressing the movements and the protests and every other activism form that is coming out to speak up about Palestine. So that's in a nutshell my project, and it's coming after quite some time working on the surveillance industry on Palestine and feeling that people sometimes feel demotivated. So I think what I'm trying to do is trying to break the feeling of isolation, so people can feel more solidarity with each other, and they can feel the strength and the strength of collective struggle and collective advocacy efforts. Thank you so much. Grace, off to you.
Thank you, Mona. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Gichanga. I'm based in South Africa, but I was born in Nairobi, Kenya, moved to SA 1999. Yeah, when the world was gonna change. Yeah, so I've been in South Africa for a very long time. Had a very like with most migrants, had a very traumatic experience on my documentation journey together with my family. And today I'm an admitted attorney in South Africa. But what is likely not shocking is that people today are still experiencing the same challenges my family and I experienced when we first moved to this country. Just a little bit, I want to just give a little bit of historical context of how I ended up doing what I'm doing. I don't know if you might have heard, South Africa has been plagued with xenophobia, when a lot of xenophobic flares in the last couple of years, with a big one that came up in 2008, where the whole country experienced some really horrific events that, and since then, unfortunately, we've had a lot of political leaders fanning these flames as a means of electioneering, or just playing into the conversation of foreigners are here to take your jobs, foreigners are here to take over, and a lot of that narrative that is misinformed, and a lot of and also perpetuates a lot of fear. So I'm a Migration and Tech Monitor Fellow. This fellowship came at a very interesting time. South Africa had elections in June, and the lead up to the elections was a very difficult time in South Africa for migrants, because prior to that, there was a policy shift where the ruling party was proposing to overhaul the entire immigration system, withdraw from UN conventions. Basically, it was almost as if there was a drive to sort of, claw back a lot of the rights that were in the constitution for migrants in South Africa. Luckily, to date, we have a new things didn't quite go that way. We have a new Minister of Home Affairs, and a lot of the overhaul discussions have been pulled back. But that still brings us to why I'm part of why I'm a fellow, essentially, is in the work that we do. I run a legal and psychosocial clinic in Johannesburg. We're based in the inner city, and because that's where a large population of the migrants are. A big part of our work, especially when we do outreach, is that people just don't know what their rights are. They don't know what to do, how to do it and where to do it. People don't know that they have, as enshrined in the Constitution, the right to education, the right to health, and many other rights that are protected in the Constitution for migrants and everybody that lives in South Africa. But because of the political climate that we find ourselves in, a lot of migrants are afraid to go out there and rock the boat. And because South Africa doesn't have an encampment policy, which is actually good because then people are able to freely live within the communities. But because we haven't done enough work in promoting social cohesion between migrants and host communities, we find that migrants do struggle a lot in trying to adapt to their host communities. And that's the intersection of where we do a lot of our work. So in providing documentation support for our migrants, as well as pursuing a trauma-informed response to these migrants, because I think that's something we don't talk about enough, the trauma of the journey. A lot of that gets shelved, and it's actually secondary to the need to be documented. So we find that when we, initially we were just focused on documentation, but we found that getting documented was a survival need. They needed to be documented, but after we got them documented, we realized that you needed to work on the person, on their psyche. And with providing that psychosocial support, we've been able to see really good success in having a lot of our migrants actualize in ways that we are very proud of today. So that's a little bit of what we're working on here in South Africa. You know, listening to my fellows and their experiences with harmful technology, that conversation hasn't come up in South Africa yet. There were ramblings before the elections when there was the consideration with overhauling the entire migration system. Will it come? I don't know. Is it likely to come? Yes.
Wow. Yeah, thank you all so much. I mean, it's really, really great to hear about all of your work. And yeah, I do encourage everybody to both follow the links that Petra shared in the chat. It's really great to be able to find out more. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about this kind of in the context of the book, but also, yeah, as we learn more about your work through the rest of the discussion. I suppose first, I wanted to ask, kind of building on Grace's point there, and particularly on the kind of like, what are the psychosocial effects of living under surveillance? I know, Mona, this is something you spoke about as well. And I'd like to talk a little bit about like what visibility means in the context of movement and border surveillance. And obviously, like a core part of the way that systems of surveillance work is by rendering subjects not only visible, but legible in very particular ways. So as Petra, as you write in the chapter on data colonialism, you quote, borders and technology often work in opposition to community, treating people as data points to be extracted, collected, and kept apart, rigidly trapping people in categories and actively fighting against the complexities of identity that all of us carry. And there's this simultaneous exclusionary and extractive process in which to be a part of a society and gain access to basic services, you need to offer yourself up for surveillance and the extraction of data, right? A process we see more and more throughout everyday life in lots of our societies, but particularly compounded in some of the contexts like refugee camps in Kenya and Jordan are some of the ones that you cite in the book. And this kind of echoes a kind of contradictory relationship between organized abandonment and the invisibility and the invisibilized suffering at play in border regimes, with the hypervisibility of people on the move in political and media narratives of a migration crisis, right? And moral panics about the alien or invasive other. And again, this often serves to really flatten identities, particularly along racial, gendered, national lines, and conforming to really strict binaries of whether that's civilized and uncivilized, or victims and criminals, and like deserving and undeserving. There's something, you know, that we see a lot in this kind of refugee and migration sector. So in this context, the agency and consent of people in determining their own visibility and privacy is really something quite pivotal, and again, something that you discussed in the book really well, Petra. But I wonder if all of you can kind of each talk a little bit about the impact of surveillance and this type of extractive visibility on people, both in everyday lives in the extreme conditions of movement, but also just as a general, like, what does that mean? How that affects, yeah, the psychosocial development and existence of communities subjected to such regimes, and what resistance to that looks like as well, right? Because as we know, resistance exists and is enacted against these regimes in so many ways every day. Veronica, do you want to?
Yeah, can I go first to talk about like those psychosocial impacts? So me being in Mexico, it's understanding that I am currently in a place of transit. It is not the people on the move's objective to stay here. It's just a place to go through. And so kind of like taking from what Grace was saying, I'm paraphrasing, how difficult and violent it is to migrate and then to adapt to the new communities. Like I in my reporting, I can see live, like that trauma taking place. For example, state and municipal security authorities are a constant harasser of people on the move. And so, and they're the principal like abuser of people on the move, also putting like organized crime but all of these combination of agents and organized crime and sometimes just the community are inflicting a trauma. It translates to crimes, to crimes like robbery, kidnapping. People get oh my God, they get like their money stolen. People get kidnapped. People get killed as well. And so we see that trauma getting happening in real life, right? And that abuse taking place, it's a border itself. It's making the transit more difficult, and it's making people question if they can leave their place of origin or not. Like if it's they start to measure, like, do I stay here where I don't have a future, or do I risk the very difficult transit? Then you have like just natural and like the obstacles that nature itself puts, like just crossing the Darien Gap. It's a challenge. Just crossing the Rio Grande here at the US and Mexico border, it's another challenge. Like when actually thinking about June, July, and August are kind of like the months where we see the most deaths here in the border. And those are inflicted by drowning and heat stroke. And so overall, this is how, like, in general, the society is putting borders on people on the move. And then we have, and going on what Mona was saying, these surveillance industry put in place, right? There's this whole industry to put and keep borders in place to kind of like cause all of this trauma. And overall, like, just also what we've been seeing here at the border is how the use of the surveillance bracelets that ICE uses to keep track of people who are already in the United States, that's kind of like a mental prison for them. It has people who are often under those type of surveillance suffer from anxiety, and also kind of like I've talked with some people here in Juarez about how CBP-1 also was causing some type of anxiety for people. Like just the expectation of being on your phone and kind of like waiting for that appointment, having to log in every day and kind of like being like, is it going to be today that they're going to give me my appointment to go and ask for asylum? That was a source of anxiety for people. And those are some of like the most in plain sight effects that I have seen.
Okay, if no one wants to go next, I can take it. So okay, I will of course echo everything that Veronica mentioned, because I think it's a shared experience with some differences, small differences here and there. The traumatic impact of having surveillance technologies is everywhere. We're facing that in Palestine, where they're facing that in Mexico, and every other where people are just exposed to surveillance. On top of that, I think there is something important to be highlighted whenever we are speaking about surveillance technologies, which is how surveillance technologies are used to dehumanize people, the profiling of people, the bracelets that Veronica mentioned, the profiling of Palestinians, the collection of data, the linking for each profile with your family members, to classify you as a security threat based on your profile and based on your family members' profiles, is also dehumanizing. It's basically work to labeling and stereotyping people. And in the case of Palestine, it's like downgrading Palestinians because like we're the occupied people, but also in other places, it's always used to discriminate against certain groups, whether they be the people on the move, whether they be the poor people, whether they be the people of color, or whatever. So it's always used to dehumanize certain communities, certain people, and to downgrade them in certain contexts, especially whenever there is this complex, really, it's not complex. I mean, this power dynamics or power imbalance between occupying power or certain authorities and migrants. So we are speaking about here a dehumanization that starts with the act of seeing people as data, generating this data, cultivating this data, and then like making money out of this dehumanization. The whole process of that is insane and is terrifying because we don't even know which system is connected with other system. So we know that we are profiled, but we don't know if this data is used to feed into other different other systems in this surveillance state. That's like one point. On the other hand, I think there's something that we should be highlighting, which is the way how people are communicating with each other, our language, our communication. As Palestinians, we don't communicate normally. We don't say things on its name because we know that our phones, our communication, because like Palestinians have no control over our communication infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure, which means there is no privacy, which means that the Israelis are spying on different things that we don't know where they are spying, but the feel of panopticon makes us feeling that they are surveilling every mobile phone. So even if you want to when you are speaking with your family, you want to mention a security event or something that you've seen in the news, you can't frankly say, oh, I've seen this thing happen, because this phone might be surveilled, and this is basically put you under the spot, makes you question at some point why you are speaking about something like that. Many of the Palestinian, for example, political fractions are classified or are designated on the US terrorist list or FTO. So even if we want to say a piece of news about, for example, Hamas fighters in Gaza, we can't say the word Hamas. Like we do code those words. In Palestine, we don't have a green party per se, but whenever we want to say something about Hamas, we would say the green people, because this is how we communicate about things. So we are coding our own language, and we get it whenever we're speaking with each other, so we can keep the communication. But on the longer term, I think we're changing our means of communication, our own language, and our communication on its own. And the end result of all of that is how surveillance technologies are affecting trust relationships between people and their governments or authorities, and people with their own communities, because having that, like living in occupied community but also under a surveillance state, where sometimes they are using certain tools, surveillance, to, for example, one of the things that the Israelis are doing, they use surveillance technologies to spy on certain people, for example, on the queer community. And because we are living in a very conservative community, they would be threatening them. We either out you to your community or you would be a collaborator, and this could happen. And in this case, you would even lose the trust relationship with your own community member, which is terrifying on the longer term. You would have no trust relationships with your circles, unfortunately. So I think the surveillance impact is maybe on the short term, we're speaking about like language and we're speaking about changing our behavior or something like that. But on the longer term, it's affecting our mentality, how we see relationships, how we see different other things. And I think that's why we are always ready or like confronting those technologies.
They said it all. In South Africa, we haven't had the experience of the use of harmful surveillance technology to monitor migrants in the country. What we do have is rather in-person surveillance of migrants in the country. What I mean by that is that there's usually heavy police presence in areas that are populated, high migrant populations. There are many raids that happen in those areas. There's a lot of raids that happen from the Department of Labor and the police to employers who are suspected of employing migrants. So in that sense, that is the surveillance that a lot of our migrants experience on a day-to-day basis. And again, it goes back to the hostile attitudes towards migrants, especially migrants from the African continent who come to South Africa. Just that hostility towards them also translates into some of these state actors, being the police, being labor, being Home Affairs itself, where there is a challenge of a lot of those state actors not being properly educated on the rights of migrants in the country, and also with their own biases, and then them obviously then using a lot of excessive force and unnecessary violence when it comes to dealing with migrants. So for me, when we spoke of borders, I think one thing we don't talk about enough is the border of language and culture. When you arrive in a host country or host community, it's a big barrier that that's a big hindrance to you actually integrating, and we don't talk about that enough. And because we also don't do enough work to promote cohesion with host communities, I just want to echo what Mona said. It promotes the dehumanizing of migrants when they arrive after going through all the trauma of the journey in itself. And also in South Africa, we have a challenge with corruption. So there is a lot of money being made from a lot of these dehumanizing practices. Just to echo what Veronica said earlier, there's a new practice now, again with digital borders, where new asylums are expected to do an online application for asylum. But what we are fighting, or what we argue against that, is that, first of all, they arrive in the country, they have no idea that they're supposed to do that, and they're supposed to do that within 5 days. And then when they do sometimes present themselves at the refugee reception offices, they're then arrested because they did not apply online, but they didn't know they were supposed to apply online. So a lot of our work with partners is fighting unnecessary detention of migrants. And it just speaks to how this is just a money-making operation, because it's lucrative to deport migrants. It's a lucrative contract to do all of that, because you always wonder why do you guys keep doing this when they're gonna jump the river again? And you spoke about land borders. I mean, the border to come to South Africa is when people jump the border, we're speaking of people jumping over or swimming through the Limpopo River, which is actually highly crocodile infested. So people are literally losing their lives. And some of these things, when you try and engage with government, there isn't much of a response other than they're illegal. you asked us about the resistance. I think the resistance is migrants and taking the journey, and I think it was Veronica who said it, making the decision to leave everything behind and come to a country in search of a better life. That is the resistance, because you're choosing to want a better life. You're against all odds. That is the resistance. And there's a reason why people like myself and my fellow fellows exist, because then all we can do is support those who make that choice in promoting safer and better migration. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much. Petra, do you have anything to add? Or... Okay. Yeah, I want us to have plenty of time for both audience to kind of ask some questions and for you all to kind of speak to each other in that. So I'm going to try and combine a couple of other questions that I have. Yeah, I mean, we've already heard a lot about like how truly global, that these issues are, and not just these issues, but I mean the companies and relationships between states that are at the heart of these technologies. And we've already heard about a lot of the different case studies. I do think it's important we acknowledge, of course, that we are 9 months into the genocide being perpetrated by Israel in Gaza, and obviously the long century of colonial violence that is behind that, and experimentation in strategies of population control as like colonialism. And particularly within that, what the role of narratives of security play, and how it feels as though really, I mean, even particular companies like Elbit Systems profit massively both within the field of military weaponry and arms, but also this kind of supposedly a bit more domestic and it's obviously still very violent, but a bit more kind of like inward-looking idea of security and defense, protection, and surveillance is a really core part of that. And so I suppose thinking about how much these technologies are wedded to the security agenda, and particularly how much migration control in particular has taken on the language of security so much. I mean, just with the new Labour government in the UK, where I live, just today have reaffirmed their plans to set up a new border security command. And this is supposed to kind of symbolize their departure from previous administrations, but it's really the same violent policies, right? And so with that in mind, it's really easy, to perceive the kind of techno-solutionism that you've brought up already as, a complete fallacy, and that it's always going to be violent, right? So it's very easy to come away from this with technology bad, right? So when we consider the extractive and exclusionary logics that do underlie so much of these systems, and those colonial origins, and the power dynamics, racial biases play in their development and implementation, and not just the seeming impossibility of regulation. We often hear about how regulation with these sorts of technologies is so difficult because technology develops at such a quick pace, but really that in itself is quite a problematic idea, right? That regulation is a solution when who will we look to for regulation? If it's states and international institutions we've already heard about and can read about how much the EU and even groups like the UN human rights organizations have a play in this violence and innovating these new forms of technology and implementing them in a way that is extractive. So really, is technology an answer there? Should we be right in being just like, okay, maybe we move away from that? But then I also think at the same time, technology can be a really vital tool for people on the move, and within our organizing against these systems and in sustaining our communities more broadly, as some of which has already been discussed. I am thinking in particular of groups like Alarm Phone and Watch the Med, who use tech to monitor and mobilize support for boats in distress in the Mediterranean. And I mean, I'm sure you can all come up with lots of examples of the way the technology is utilized really effectively by people on the move. And Grace, I know that your project in developing Luma has also been a really great example of that. So I suppose I wanted to ask, like, what examples you do have of technology being used towards more liberatory or progressive ends, how you envision the role of tech in more liberated futures, and what that means, again, in relationship to that concept of security, and how much those things need to be kind of separated for any sort of hope of a liberated future.
Maybe I'll just jump in really briefly to reflect on some of the broader ideas that you're sharing, Miles. And, you know, for me, technology is ultimately about power. It's a lens through which to understand how power operates in society and how there are massive power differentials between those who get to innovate and who are around the table and set the agenda, whether that is international organizations or states or very often the private sector, and the communities that are made marginalized historically. And then unfortunately, what we're seeing right now in this paradigm is that, again, technologies reify this vast power differential. But it doesn't have to be this way, right? I think there is a huge liberatory kind of potential when it comes to imagining different futures, perhaps borderless futures, right? But I think it also, sometimes it starts small and, not again to plug the Migration and Technology Monitor because we're far from perfect, but we're also trying to kind of advocate or present perhaps a slightly different way of working together, a way of working that redistributes resources directly to people who are on the ground, who are really the experts in this, right? Designing and co-creating projects slowly and carefully and critically that maybe isn't as sexy as some of the big splashy projects that are out there, but perhaps working in these slower, more community grounded ways is actually an ethic of care that is what's going to animate being able to even imagine a different world. But my three colleagues were, I'm sure, able to point to specific examples because there definitely are some where I think technology is used as a way to either resist the current paradigm or to even imagine a brand new one.
So the question is how technology is used in a positive way, like examples?
Yeah, if you like, and also how you feel about what is the role of technology in that kind of future of a potentially borderless or liberated future.
Well, this is from like a personal experience. Like I was just like having dinner with friends and we're talking about how in Juarez, like our different families, they came from different states of Mexico because Juarez being a border town is just a place for migration to pass through. And in consequence, some people stay. So we were talking about this web of migration of how their families got to Juarez. And it was kind of like, oh, well, I have a cousin that lives here. So maybe if you come, you can stay over with him. And in the meantime, that you find a place, right? Like it was a very similar story for everyone. There was someone connecting you to the community so you could get here. So we were kind of like tracing kind of like this immigration path, right? What I see in technology is how those paths are being replicated and through social media. So for example, there are groups in WhatsApp or Facebook where people share kind of like tips or tips on like, hey, I'm in Juarez, where do you recommend for me to stay? And so people like they're not even connected, they're not family, they're not friends, but they're from the same country. Like two people from Venezuela, they'll be like, I was in Juarez 3 months ago and I stayed at this shelter. I'll give you the number of the pastor or the director. And they kind of start to create these paths. And just the creation of these communities kind of like make it not easier, but makes the path a little bit more friendly and that someone is there. So that's how I see that technology is being used in a positive way.
What Veronica described is what we're trying to do with our chatbot. We're trying to create a platform that offers resources and information to people on the move and to people who are currently within South Africa, hopefully at some point for the rest of Africa, because that's exactly what it is. People don't know where to look for help. They don't know that there are existing support organizations. A lot of people don't know that we exist, or even some of the bigger support organizations exist. And even if they do, there's a lot of fear in approaching support organizations because sometimes you don't know where they stand. There's also a lot of misinformation out there about the data that we collect, because obviously we would need to collect data when we're onboarding users onto our platform. So there's also a lot of work that will need to be done to gain the trust of the migrant community for them to understand that the chatbot is there to help them and not to harm them, because technology and their data has been used to harm them in the past. But when you asked about how do I feel about the role of technology in the future, I think we need to be realistic and honest with ourselves and understand that we can't go into the future without accepting the reality that technology will have to be used as an enabler for good. We'll have to counter a lot of the harmful effects of technology. Like Petra said, we have to start small. We have to start somewhere. It might not be perfect. Nothing that starts small ever is. But I do believe that technology can be a very useful tool for people in the move, in creating a lot of connection, in creating community, and also just a place of safety for people who are not connected to people that they know, like Veronica said. So in a nutshell, that's exactly what we're trying to do with the chatbot, access to information and access to resources.
I think in the Palestinian case, technology has been, it's hard to say, like, it's an operation tool, but it's also a tool that we are trying to mobilize to spread the narrative, to raise awareness. Like in the past 9 months, I think one of the main things that really helped to amplify Palestinian voices on the ground was social media. However, I'm saying that while I think like with a heart broken, like because of that happens with all the censorship that we are facing, with all the biased content moderation policies on different social media platforms, with all the removal of documentations of human rights violations on different social media platforms, including the biggest one of them, which is Meta. We're saying that while we know that we're not also alone who are encountering the censorship, we know that also other people in global majority countries are facing the same exact thing. And not only that, also other people in global north who are just writing about Palestine, they are also facing the same censorship, and they are getting shadow banned because they are trying to speak up about what's going on in those 9 months. So it's like the technology question is not black or white, and it could never be like this. It's more of being skeptical about how even when we are using social media platforms to mobilize and to organize and to raise awareness about our causes, we are also being surveilled, because with all of that going on, the Israelis are spying on people online. They are arresting people from their online posts and content. And some also Israeli pages have been spreading different or sharing different posts where they are asking for information. One of those pages basically was a Shabak page or the Shin Bet. They were targeting a Lebanese woman, telling them that they should collaborate with them. So it's, again, it's not the black or white thing. It's more, we need to be skeptical about, no matter what, how we are using social media or different technologies. At the end of the day, we are in global majority countries lagging behind whenever it comes to the design of technologies and to the legislation or regulation of technologies. And that's a point, even if we are benefiting from the use of different technologies, at the end of the day, they are making more money, they are getting more benefit, way more than the one that we are getting. Because if there's no occupation, we don't need it really. Why do we use it? For social connection, we can think about other ways to communicate with each other. So yeah, that's my very personal opinion on that.
Thank you all. Yeah, really helpful answers. And yeah, I really like that idea of starting small and where it goes from there. Okay. So yeah, I'd love to also hear any questions from people in the audience. I am just going to share fundraisers from our friends in Solidarity Detainee Support that people can have a look at if they want. We will also share these on the YouTube page, and they were shared with email invitation. Oh, it's too long. I'll share in a second. And also, while people think of questions, it would be great to hear if any of our speakers have questions for each other. I know that you all work together and have like shared ideas, and it would be great to hear about the way that you reflect on each other's work. So yeah, if there's anything, I'd love to hear that.
I think there's actually a question in the chat by Corina, which picks up some of the things that I'm always very curious about, that I would love to ask Mona, Grace, and Veronica about, and that is, yeah, how do we keep going in these times where, you know, there's a lot of good happening, of course, but it does seem like there are many intersecting, intractable issues that just seem to not be getting better, right? So how do we find joy and resistance in ourselves as well during these difficult times? If I can share, for me, what was really eye-opening and also perhaps more surprising than it should have been, maybe that shows how jaded and burnt out I was while finishing up some of this book, is that, you know, across all the different contexts that I've had the privilege to witness and be at and work in, even though sometimes it was really about holding space for some of the most difficult, oppressive situations that the heart just cannot take, but there were always people who would show up in some way. Whether it is, you know, people who are politically aligned and who are engaged in different mechanisms of resistance or showing up officially, but sometimes also people who just happen to be there. You know, that's the kind of stuff that really stuck with me. You know, I remember, for example, when we were at the Polish-Belarusian border, when there was that situation happening where people were essentially trapped in a corridor created for the reasons of weaponizing migration, right? Where a large group of people was coming through Belarus into European territory, and they were essentially trapped in a freezing forest for months. We were there to kind of document this situation, and I remember thinking, my God, this is just so horrific. And yet, as the day unfolded, we ended up going to a safe house that a Polish farmer, opened up in the middle of the exclusion zone where we were not supposed to be documenting this stuff. And he had nothing to do with kind of migration or this situation in particular. He just saw that the situation was happening, and he felt so strongly about wanting to help that he basically risked arrest and allowed the safe house to operate in his home. Like, that's the kind of stuff that actually gives me a lot of hope for the future. And I'd be curious to hear from the others whether there are similar experiences that you want to share.
I'll go. I think for me, you know, I get asked this question a lot and I never know how to answer it. I think a lot of this work is a calling. I think you have to be deeply connected to the issues and deeply connected to wanting to find a resolution, whether that be a tech solution or a policy change or, you know, changing the narrative. I think it's just about wanting to live in a world where fairness and equality is something that's valued. I think it needs to be very aligned to your value system. But also just to what Petra said, you find friends along the way, people who support your work, even when you want to give up and you want to close up shop. You find people who come in and help you. And I think more than that, our clients, I think our clients give me a lot of hope. You know, when you listen to the stories beyond the trauma, you know, seeing a person as a person who's just full of hope and full of dreams and chose to pursue them, irrespective of all the trials. There's something very inspiring about that. And I think I absorb a lot of that courage and a lot of that hope in doing the work that I do. Yeah, it's not something I think I would, you do get burnt out. You really do. I think sometimes having to listen to the trauma that a lot of the migrants have to go, it's very hard. And I think as a lawyer, I haven't been trained. I don't have the skill set to deal with trauma. That's why I had to bring a social worker into the team, because I realized that not just for the clients, but for myself as well, and for the rest of the legal team, because we don't know how to respond to trauma. We know how to ask questions and get answers and get you to a resolution, but we didn't know people tell you their stories, and their stories matter to them, and you need to be present, and you need to, like you said, hold space for them. And I needed to recognize that we needed somebody else in the team to help support us in doing a lot of that work. So I think a lot of it just comes from also just winning. We win, we get people documented, and that's a really good feeling.
For me, I will start with what my Palestinian teta, my Palestinian granny taught me when I was like little cat. She's like, personal is political and vice versa. So I can't look at surveillance and separate that from being a human being, from being Palestinian, from being brown, Palestinian, Middle Eastern woman, belonging to the global majority countries and belong to so many people who are either in the move or who are oppressed in the global majority countries. So for me, I literally have nothing to be fear of. We kind of fearless at some point. And unfortunately, sometimes even we internalize some trauma because we are facing that a lot. We are firsthand experience. We every single, I live in a city and my family live in another city. So every single time, every week when I go to visit my mom, I need to pass through 2 military checkpoints where they are heavily loaded with CCTV cameras, with Blue Wolf, with different other surveillance technologies. So to some extent, I am aware that this is not normal, but sometimes we just internalize that passing through such heavily loaded military checkpoints is something that we must do because we need to see our families. So that's why we feel fearless, because we want to continue our life and we believe in freedom for everyone. We believe in justice for everyone. And sometimes it's funny, but it's also sad, because sometimes we would be asking ourselves, if there is no occupation or if there is no oppression in this world, what would we do, what we will do. And it's funny because all of us are working in really dark reality, but we do that because we believe in hope, we believe in justice. And I think that's the very thing that motivates me to keep going every day, despite everything that is going on the ground.
Well, I shared some links on the chat because for me is finding the thing that we're fighting against is burnout. There's a point where you're just it's enough, it's enough. And I recommend looking at the issue, at borders, and through different lenses. And one that it's very healing, it's art. So I shared 2 links. One is from a poem written by Maria Esquinca. She's a poet from El Paso, Texas. It's called the US and Mexico border replaces itself. It's beautiful. Then the work of photographers like Ingrid Leiva. It's fascinating. She looks at border dynamics in a very particular way. She finds, Mona said how sometimes this, we find the funny in the dark, right? I feel like a lot of Ingrid's work does that. And so, yeah, I recommend looking at art.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. All of those sounds really beautiful. And yeah, Petra, I know that in the introduction you quote Mariam Kaba on hope being a discipline. And I think that everything that each of you has just described is a really a way that hope is something that we practice in an intentional way. And there are different things that we can look to draw from there. Okay, great. Are there any other questions from the audience or from each of you?
I've got a question. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, sorry, I'm not going to turn my video on because I'm in a shared space, but I just want to say thank you so much for all of the contributions. It's been super insightful. I've got a question about the impact of new tech on children in particular. So I work with an organisation that works with children on the move on the France-UK border, and we often see kids who show fear about drones, talking about like the police are watching us, that kind of thing. So the impact of surveillance on them is really apparent. However, on the flip side of this, we quite regularly see older kids in particular who use phones and social media to express themselves, and almost like it's a identity building or claiming their voices in a world that's silencing them. So I guess we see both the psychological harm that's being done by these new tech, as well as opportunities they create for empowerment, although we are obviously concerned about access to online spaces and putting them at different risks, which is something that you touched on, Mona. So I guess I'm just interested to know, in each of your contexts, if you see parallels to this for children, or if you've seen other impacts of new tech for children on the move in particular.
Okay, maybe I can jump, but then ladies, please feel free to jump in. So I think there's like really sad reality when it comes to children, especially children with surveillance and all the new technological industries, because like the way how people are dealing with children pictures, children content, sharing that with no agency. That's even before like start speaking about the migrants, or like this is like with the very basic thing before like start having all the lenses that can increase the discrimination online. The whole idea of sharing pictures of the babies online with no agency, they didn't choose to do that, creating those digital traces for the children without them deciding that they want to be on those platforms is a big thing. And then we go to surveillance industry, because they are also profiled. They exist on databases and on different surveillance system without choosing that. So I think, to me, this is even worse whenever we're looking at the child convention, because there's this piece that I was trying to write during my master's dissertation, not dissertation, but like master degree. And when I was looking at even the child convention, it was lastly updated in 2000. And all the social media platforms came even after that. All like the intensive use of surveillance industry start mostly after, or like it was used before, but like more like intensively is used after that. And this basically means that even the regulation, the global regulations, the global conventions are also lagging behind all the technologies. And I don't want to say no one, but like literally who's thinking about those children digital traces, and who's protecting those children? And again, this is even before we start speaking about children in move or children under war. Like when I look at children's pictures in Gaza Strip, I feel literally terrified, because those children didn't like, they are dehumanized. They are on the social media. They didn't choose to do that. They're just there because they were forced to be there. Like there's someone who's just like documenting what's going on, and they are posting those people with no agency, with no question, with nothing, and putting that online. However, when we are looking at different other countries, we look at like different consent forms, different ways how children are treated. So I mean, to me, it's a big debate, and it's a big question that I really don't have an answer to. But those are things that I think I was thinking about when I was looking into the children issues and the intersection of that with the technology and with the tech industry.
Thank you for your question, Katie. I think South Africa is on the opposite end of the spectrum, where children are actually likely to be invisible and have no footprint. We have a huge potential child statelessness problem, where children who are born in South Africa are struggling to access birth registration, leaving them completely invisible to the system. So the question of surveillance doesn't even come up, because we're trying to get the state to recognize them as people who exist within the country and who can benefit from the social services. So from that point of view, and I've seen how we do a lot of work in schools. I've seen how the older kids who are turning 15, 16, and at a point where children in South Africa are supposed to be getting an ID, a lot of kids who are in South Africa, who are either born here or came when they were really young, a lot of them, their parents don't even tell them that they are not South African. And a lot of them only realize for the first time that they are not South African when they are trying to go get their ID. So a big problem that we are trying to address on our side is actually invisibility within the system, which is a big challenge for us. With respect to social media is also, I know I keep repeating myself, but it's also a very hostile place for migrants who present themselves authentically. Once you find a person who comes and says, I'm loud and proud, I'm a migrant living in South Africa successfully, there's a lot of bashing of, you're here to take our opportunities. There's just not enough space for them to authentically show up online without facing a lot of that hostility. So from my side, unfortunately, it's the issue of invisibility and hostility, which the hostility on the ground often translates to hostility online.
It's a good question, Katie, that I haven't thought much about. So I don't feel like I have much to add from what Mona and Grace said. But I'm pretty sure that it might be tied to, in the case of Mexico, it might be tied with the greater issue that it's that not every child has the right to identity. So the issue of not having like proper identification.
Just to quickly add, Katie, your question also made me think of the fact that it's so important to think contextually about how these issues play out, right? Children are a group that we definitely need to foreground, but also impacts of tech and surveillance on women, on people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, people who might be differently abled. So definitely these are, I think, areas that, at least from my perspective, remain kind of under-discussed and understudied in this area too. So that's definitely some of the areas that we'll be delving into at the Monitor for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was all super interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I also just wanted to highlight Mariam's comment in the chat on the topic of storytelling, and yeah, really emphasizing again how important a lot of the work that all of you are doing and that this conversation has been and this book does in really providing spaces and resources that do allow like individuals to reclaim their agency. And again, that kind of like role about agency, whether that's for children or people of all ages who often are invisibilized or abandoned in different mechanisms, like that agency, both to tell a story, but also to make those decisions of movement and everyday life is really essential. think we're going to wrap things up around there. So yeah, thank you again so much to Petra, Mona, Grace, and Veronica. Thank you all, everybody who's joined us. This has been really, really interesting and a really valuable conversation. Yeah, we will, like I say, be uploading this onto our YouTube. You can also find out more about Books Against Borders by following us on social media or getting in touch with us. We do have a website and an email, which is booksagainstborders@gmail.com. If you want to get involved, or yeah, we will have some in-person workshops coming up over the next few months, and hopefully some more online events too. Yeah, do also follow Migration and Tech Monitor and our wonderful speakers where you can. And yeah, I look forward to hearing about the way that your work all develops. And yeah, just thanks again so much for this really, really generative and helpful conversation, and for the work that you do, which, as has been said in the chat and elsewhere, is just really important at doing the work of fighting against these systems of violence. So thank you all, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.